Um, I have the great pleasure of talking about video. Video in all of its aspects for professional learning and for refining the language that we use to actually describe, analyze, and develop great teaching. And I've had the privilege of working with Charlotte Danielson now for the last several years, developing what we at Teachscape have come to understand to be a sort of ecosystem of supports around her framework. And I say this because I know you are embarking upon a similar effort here to design and develop your own thinking about math science teaching. And I want to call out, I think, some of the things that we have learned that both the supervisors of instruction, if you will, whether those supervisors be principals or classroom observers or coaches or mentors of teachers, need to actually conduct the work of using a framework to develop teaching, or what teachers need to understand the framework around which they will be conversing with coaches or mentors or other instructional leaders. And so we've developed a set of tools, some of which we will in tomorrow's session go into more deeply in a hands-on way. They involve, and I'm going to show you a little bit of an overview of some of these as we get into things here this morning. They involve training observers to understand the components of that framework. If you looked at Charlotte's earlier slide, those 4 domains and the 30-odd components that are within them, that's a lot of information for any one observer or coach or mentor to keep track of at any given time. And the complexity of the various moving parts of teaching is certainly one of the things that we've learned takes a considerable amount of training and support and accuracy. We're going to talk a lot about the importance of accuracy in having useful conversations about teaching and being able to move the bell curve that you saw Charlotte display earlier from the left to the right. If we are not precise in what we mean about engagement or questioning or the cognitive demand or the respect and rapport between a teacher and a student, it's very difficult to actually develop them from basic to proficient and on to distinguished level practice. We have found that giving observers opportunities to practice their analytical skills using video has been an enormously powerful tool to developing the precision with which they use the language of the framework. And we have gone so far to build a proficiency assessment. We actually go through a process of what we call master scoring of video. And master scoring is not simply taking the smartest person in the room and giving them a videotape and saying score. It actually involves a consensus building process. It's the same methodology that's used for designing standardized assessments of students, where items are selected for degree of difficulty on the basis of experts agreeing that this item actually does measure the skill that it's intended to measure, and then validating that through a process of using the item over a great deal of time. There's a similar process for the use of video, which involves bringing folks who are trained and agreed to be experts in their field, whether it be in science, in physics, or mathematics, looking at a lesson, looking at your rubric, scoring that lesson, and agreeing that it represents the level of distinguished performance that you believe is what all teachers should be aspiring to in that skill. It's a time-consuming, very critical process. Not all video equally represents the skills and knowledge of your framework. So building an assessment is critical whether or not you're simply trying to ensure that the people giving feedback to teachers are defining the performance levels in common ways, so that whether if a teacher is in her classroom and meets with one coach at an early part of her career, the the language used to describe where she is on a particular set of skills is going to be the same language and, if you will, performance level that would be used if another coach were to come in, right? We have to have consistency around the way we do this. And having built that sort of assessment, we've discovered that in teaching, as in many other fields, observers who have expertise tend to drift in their quality. What they perceived to be a great teaching is affected by several things, not the least of which is personal relationship. It's very hard to look critically at a professional colleague, even when you're trying to help them. Let's keep the whole idea of evaluation aside for a second. Even when I'm trying to help, my judgment of you professionally is colored by the fact that I know you, that I may have personal preferences about certain aspects of your teaching that I happen to enjoy personally, but I know in my mind actually don't correlate to kids' achievement. And this is particularly true, and the use of video calls out these certain biases, if you will. And so calibration is a way of checking your judgment against master-scored lessons. And a system that we've done that. We have then developed an entire observation management system for tracking all the data of observation. I won't spend much time on that. For teachers, so again, in the same way that an observer or a coach or a mentor, a staff developer, would need to have all this level of accuracy, all of the learning, to go back to Charlotte's earlier point, to her cognitive science 101 statement that learning is done by the learner. Well, in teacher learning, the teacher needs to be as proficient in the framework and the performance levels as represented in video as the observer does. And therefore, we've built out a whole suite of online resources that show teachers what it looks like. And there we have the challenge you heard Charlotte reference in her rubric, is a generic rubric. It defines teaching at its fundamental core and structures, but teachers teach subjects and content at grade levels, and they want to see examples of what it looks like in a 10th grade biology classroom or in a 9th grade algebra classroom. They don't always want to see the early childhood reading lesson when they're trying to teach 10th grade biology. And so it's incumbent upon us to build out a vast array of video-based lessons that have been master scored for teachers to see. And there's a second challenge that's associated with developing an archive of this nature. We do not want to hold up the notion that teaching effectively in a grade or subject around one of the components of the framework can only be done one way. But there are many ways to effectively teach a lesson. So it's incumbent upon us to build multiple examples. And as we dive into what we've learned around teacher learning using video, it is our belief that comparative video analysis is far more powerful than holding up individual videos as sort of models of instruction. What you want to try to get people to do is see different strategies for teaching or conveying the same material that are still at a distinguished level, but could be very different in their approaches, potentially developing, depending on the learning styles of the students, but also equally dependent on the sort of preferences and style of the teacher, quite frankly. And the conversation about teaching is so much richer when there are these comparative examples. So this entire ecosystem is dependent on video. It's all built around video. And I like to quote a famous New York Yankee baseball player who liked to say that you can observe a lot just by watching. And by way of an example here, I want to go back to how many of you have seen this before? Have you seen this? A few of you? All right, don't give it away. For those of you, this was produced by the British government. It highlights a
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
So I call that out and use that as an example, and maybe we can connect this to what we know about teaching for a second. So let's go back to Charlotte's theater in the round for a second. Well, it's a great metaphor for looking at those different components. Now connect it to what you know about researching and teaching. If in the course of a day, I'm making 1,500 important decisions in my classroom as a teacher, how do I isolate a particular light in the moment to capture the essence of that decision and analyze whether leave aside what the rest of you think. It's my lesson. What do I think about the choice I made? How do I get sort of metacognitive about my own practice? What are the tools that I need to do that? Right? That really, and we're at a point in software and video where we're beginning to learn some of the things that we need to do this. And to sort of set this up, I want to contextualize some things that we know from research. So this article by Tony Breik, who now replaced Lee Schulman, who we've heard at the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, wrote this wonderful piece that sort of situates teaching in a body of literature that I want to talk about expertise-based sort of professions. And it talks about, it's a long sentence in here, but I just want to call out the middle portion of it where it talks about the teacher isolating the immediate goals for instruction, having a command of a set of pedagogical tools and resources, and the concept I like the most is automaticity in their use, right? The idea that as a teacher, I have intuitively made the information about my learner, my curriculum, my context, my day, my learning objective, and when things happen in the classroom, I have a form of pattern recognition. That pattern recognition is a form of expertise. As Charlotte said, it is, and to go back to what Eli said at the beginning, this is what distinguishes us as a profession from others that simply have repetitive actions or motions in what they're doing. So how do we teach and learn this? Well, we know a lot. Peter Fade is a researcher at the University of Southern Illinois who looks at expertise-based training and tries to unpack the decision-making of experts. And what's interesting, there's a whole body of literature on expertise-based training. And if you look at the professions that it tends to focus on, things like the battlefield management, those who are sort of in the military realm of life, pilots who are forever processing complex information on the fly, athletes, emergency response team, surgeons, I think someone Eli made reference to, teachers fall into the exact same body of literature when discussed. And if you go back to what you know about the way in which those professions are trained, the analysis of video is at the heart of the way it is done. For those of you who have children, you send them to tennis camp now, the first thing they do is a version of what you see in that upper left-hand quadrant. They let them serve, they put a little camera on a stationary tripod, and they film them, and they make them sit down and watch their swing, and they will layer your serve against a professional who has a similar approach to serve. And they'll show you the difference between your swing and the professional swing over and over again until you begin to see. And they don't take a one-size-fits-all. They're not trying to turn everybody into Rod Laver or whomever. They are taking the professionals whose approach to the craft is the most similar to yours. And similarly, in the flight simulator being the sort of ultimate manifestation of this, right? Taking video, putting it into computers, and programming what are lots of decisions that pilots are making. And what we do at Teachscape is we take the same sort of approach to teaching in the use of video. And the use of video, getting the video is not the hard part, although we'll talk a little bit about this more in workshop. Making it easy to get the right information out of video, to be able to analyze, categorize, sort, and share video for purposes of learning is a greater level of challenge and a more complex endeavor around software development. And so I take this in tomorrow's session. I'm going to go into, this is actually the same moment in time in a single lesson. And I say to go back to the theater in the round. So on the upper left-hand quadrant is a wide-angle shot of what's happening in the entire lesson. So I want to have a conversation about, are all learners engaged in the classroom? That shot on the upper right isn't going to help me analyze that question, is it? I need to get perspective on the room. And for those of you who have seen the National Board videos in the US or the typical video, we're going to do some analysis tomorrow in workshop around this. But what's the most common way in which classroom video is collected today? It's a camera at the back of the room where I'm the teacher and you're the students, and I guarantee, guess what that camera is going to show for the rest of the day? In my case, the little shiny white spot back here. That's about it, right? It is not, and how can I assess your engagement with that? Leave aside, I need to get close to you, I need to be able to get intimate with what your facial sort of expressions are, ideally, and I tried to get at it with that upper right-hand image. I would love to be able to zoom in and see what he's writing on that piece of paper right now. I'd love to know if he's doodling a note to his girlfriend or whether or not he's actually working on the physics problem that they're teaching in that lesson. The board, we learned in the context of working on the Measures of Effective Teaching project, enormously helpful. I'm sure this never happens in Israel, but in the United States, occasionally, the teacher goes to the board and gets the math wrong. And for those of you who teach like error analysis, you know, for teachers, it's extremely difficult to go back with a student and reteach something that they've been taught the wrong way over periods of time. Not because people, don't know their content. People are in a hurry. They're racing. They're trying to pay attention to some classroom management issue on this side of the classroom, and they get it wrong, and kids don't often put up their hand and correct the teacher. Sometimes they do. But so analyzing what's going on the board is critically important. And for those who are using video as a tool, we want to make sure it happens. And then lastly, and I think kind of most importantly, it's the conversation that students are having with one another that really begins to distinguish what Charlotte calls distinguished practice from merely proficient or basic level practice. It is the job of the teacher to get the kids to do the learning. And you have no idea whether they're doing the learning unless you can zoom in and hear it and see it. And so this presents all kinds of challenges from the standpoint of capture. If you look, what we have discovered and what new technology has made possible is that you see that little microphone in front of the gentleman in the blue sweatshirt there at the upper right-hand corner. We put 4 or 5 microphones in a classroom now. We put one on the teacher, we put 4 or 5 on the table. We take a wide shot of the room so that you can see this. We take a static shot of the board so that you can see this. And we have one person in the room who focuses on what the most interesting activity that is occurring between students, where you would have some human judgment, and we stitch it together in a composite that allows you to sort of see different things through software. And that has been getting this, and we're still learning, getting the sound right and the images right is critical for analysis. We're also experimenting in an area that I'll spend a minute on around panoramic video. And I'll talk a little bit about where I think the future is going around this. But in the system, so this is an example of training, and actually you're looking at a panoramic video here. This comes out of the system that we built to support the framework for teaching to train observers to a level of accuracy. So what you see up above is a section of Charlotte's rubric highlighted to capture key phrases. And then there's a collection of videos that appear below. And in selecting videos, because making professional judgment about teaching is such high sort of intellectual inferential work, right? It's all about inference. It's not that you can simply count how many times did the teacher ask a question and make a judgment about that. You're going to make very subjective judgments. You'll see that there's a benchmark. You see it says benchmark A. Underneath the video is actually benchmark B, excuse me. And below that, we have what we call a high range finder and a low range finder. This is all about sort of showing performance levels within a band of proficiency, if you will, right? With lots of examples for teachers to see and for observers to see, to get a sense that there's a range of practice that falls into this definition that we might call in a rubric distinguished. And it also you can imagine that having a group of experts sit down and look at this for a while, they're going to start to argue. They're going to argue about whether this really is what we mean when we say this is a highly effective question. They're going to look at your rubric, and every time you use an adjective or an adverb that says something like several times or often or many, you know, or there are a number of the students are engaged, they're all going to disagree with what that. When Charlotte said she went through these revisions year after year, every adjective and adverb that's imprecise will lead to disagreement by definition, right? They're going to have to make judgments. And this process of building a precise rubric is fundamentally the interaction between real examples and the rubric language that allows you to tighten and tighten and tighten that language, which is work that she's done painstakingly done over many, many hours and months and now years, and still doing. Having sort of built this practice of using tools for training observers and teachers, we've become huge believers in video as a tool for learning for teachers themselves and just to enhance reflective practice. And so we have a system that we call Reflect Video, and it has many purposes. And so you saw Charlotte talk about the framework's relevance to a range of purposes. It is incredibly helpful. I don't know, again, I really am looking to learn from you in the question and answering, to what degree teachers in their teacher preparation or their early induction in school districts here in Israel have seen themselves teach. But I know in the United States, even in this day and age with video everywhere on all our iPhones and on all our iPads, we have a huge percentage of teachers who we meet have never seen themselves teach. They could be in their 5th, 7th, 10th, 15th year of teaching and have never, ever seen what they look like. So they don't know that they always call on the first row. They are oblivious to the fact that they never let the girls talk. They have no idea that there are kids trying to ask questions that they ignore because they're rushing to get through their lecture. The revelation of video for teachers for the first time is quite a powerful one, we've discovered. For those of you who are adherents to the whole process of lesson study, where teachers come together, set forward a lesson objective, design a lesson, deliver it, and get feedback, so often that work has historically been done with, it's like the tree falling in the forest and nobody really hearing it because they're not there. Video has transformed the potential to do lesson study at a new level, where teachers can come back and look at lessons together and critique them. Coaching. Now, in the US, there is a huge problem of there being an insufficient number of coaches with sufficient content expertise to give feedback to teachers in real time. With the advent of video and the internet, coaching can be done virtually in a way it was never done before. And I'll show you the tools that we use to mark up and analyze video to give teachers feedback on its merits. Certainly in teacher preparation, we are working with a number of universities that are re-engineering the clinical components of their practice. Again, not knowing your systems as well as ours, the US-based teacher preparation programs are overly theoretical and nowhere near as practically oriented around the real challenges of teaching today in content areas. And so we're working with universities to use video as a way of much scaling up their teacher clinical programs and giving much more feedback to teachers in clinical practice. And then obviously, the two other things I would say at the end, for teacher induction and mentoring video, new teachers who don't know what their classroom routines really look like until they've established them, we're finding that video is very powerful. And lastly, the flip side of that is for a school or district to have a repository of their own best practices. So many schools in the US, you heard Charlotte say we have 50 states and 50 systems, and of course everybody believes it's different. I live in San Francisco, and they would swear in San Francisco that teaching reading is somehow different than it is in Los Angeles, which could not be more ridiculous. And but nonetheless, because of that belief, the collection of your best practices in video is a wonderful way to onboard new teachers around what your expectations are when you're working with our kids in our community with their unique qualities. So a very powerful tool. Now, all of this came out of the MET project, where we had to capture 23,000 lessons from these districts in the United States and from roughly 3,000 teachers, and then score them and judge them with Charlotte's rubric and others that were developed. And we're going to talk a little bit about that further in the morning. But in doing that, it allowed us to think about a holistic system for capturing and uploading and sharing video. So we've built a system that takes any web browser and can take video from any format. So we're big believers in everything Steve Jobs created, but the fact is there's lots of ways of getting video. And using any browser, you can take video from any device and upload it into our software system. And we have developed two types of cameras. This small camera, which we call a mini, on the right, which is basically an iPod or an iPhone, which we put in a tripod so it's steady, and we join it with a very powerful microphone. Or on the left, we've been playing around with this idea of panoramic video. So panoramic video has emerged out of the intelligence and surveillance world where everybody is interested in seeing all things. And you've seen the most powerful representation of it you all see is Google's website for real estate, right? Have you ever looked at an apartment or a house where you can walk around the room? So we actually invented that camera after working with the Google camera that you see driving on the top of the little minis where you can navigate around the streets. That camera was handmade that Google uses and costs like $50,000. And we re-engineered it to be a smaller camera that you put in a room that gives you the ability to zoom around the classroom, which allows you to see the kids and the teacher. But you just control that with your browser as a tool for looking at it. And these are the two cameras that we built. This is the mini. This lets you use any device. It's much cheaper, but it has limitations. The panoramic camera has 360-degree navigable video that allows you to see everything that's occurring. And I just want to sort of show you what you can do. Like this would be the traditional image of a classroom from the back of the room again. One of the things we do is we supplement it by just boosting a wide angle so that you get a much better perspective on the room. And then you collect a library basically, and you can see here, this would be what a teacher's collection might look like with metadata that captures what the subject was, when the video was created, what type of video it was. Again, tomorrow, for those of you who come into our workshop, I'll show you this some more. And then the most simple tool is to have a way to mark up the video and to isolate. So go back to Charlotte's Theater in the round with those lights. You see that little triangle right next to the scroll bar? That reflects this comment down here. Sorry about that. So you can hear. That comment occurs at that moment. So every time you fill in a comment in the yellow box, it affixes a a stamp on the video so that when you go back, this does two things. Number one, it makes it much more efficient to analyze because classroom video is long. And two, it allows you to share and layer comments. What did you see that I didn't see? What did Charlotte see that neither of us saw? And analyze it. And then you see in here that you see I can filter it. So I see all the comments, or at the bottom there it says my comments or my colleagues' comments. So again, I can have different perspectives on what happens in a lesson. Another thing that you can do is you can load your rubric into our system, and you can then tag the video to the components of your rubric as a way of saying these are examples, and this is Charlotte's rubric here that we're using. You see some of the components from domain 2 and 3 on the right. And what you do is simply tag the video to associate it with the components of your rubric. So if you want to reinforce the common language, you use the rubric as the framework for talking about video. And then because people don't want to share video in its entirety, we built a little clipping service. So you basically hit the create clip, you see that little scissors there in gray highlighted, and it pulls up the red and the green toggle switch, and you cut it to the moments that are the scene that if you want to share with your coach that one exchange that you thought you got wrong, you clip it and share it, and you can get feedback on that without even having the entire lesson. And that creates a new video that goes in your little your dashboard that I had at the beginning there. And so the last thing I want to say, am I okay on time? Is there a couple more minutes? All right. I have a tendency to go on. You should, okay. So the last thing that we've done is we've built out what you are familiar with, for those of you who use YouTube, a sort of private network of channels. And it starts, so I can imagine a number of you would think there is no way my teacher is going to let me videotape her teaching. It will never happen. Teaching is private, it's personal. So our system, that was true and less so today, but it was certainly true when we started. So we start with something called My Channel. If you take a video in our system, it's yours until you choose to share it. It is not Orwellian Big Brother here. It is, if you want to just see yourself, this is a tool for you to see yourself and to comment on yourself. Nobody else can see it until you decide to share it. And you can share it with one person or two people or a professional learning community in your building. And when it does, it can become part of a district or school-based library of practices that everyone can share, only if you choose to do that. And then because we've been in this business for over a decade now, we've made a huge collection. So if you want to compare your lesson to some of our video, we have our own channels that we call Teachscape channels. So those live in a learning management system, which allows you to do all kinds of things. It allows you to build out courses and learning plans and design personalized professional development and manage online courses. This is, again, not knowing how big a phenomenon it is here, it is becoming a huge phenomenon where cost and time are such a big issue in the United States. But here's sort of what it looks like when you have your channels. So I have, in this case, the site channels and some of the more popular videos that are, this is my login, that come out of our system. And you'll notice they all have some metadata describing what grade levels and what subjects are all relevant to the lesson. And I can build my own personal favorites. So I can create my own channel where I go in and I look at things that I found that the district made available or Teachscape made available or that I uploaded on my own. And this is my own private collection that I have. And I can, if I want then, work with some curator in my district to create our local site channel where we would have our own collection of things that were relevant to us as a community. And then finally, we have the collection that you can draw from that's a central repository. This is just sort of a multi-layered way to access and organize video for everyone. And in your channel, the same tool that I was showing you for marking up the video is there, but now it exists with discussion boards so that you can have an ongoing conversation about your lesson with folks. And that is a kind of overview of the system that we've built around supporting the video